Welcome back to the Fishing Rod Masterclass and what the blank, carbon graphite or fiberglass, which is the best material for your rod? And the answer is probably not what you think. Thank you so much for all the support and love you had for the first part of the Fishing Rod Masterclass. I'm so excited to share the rest of this Masterclass with all of you. If you haven't watched it yet, there's probably a card up here somewhere, but it's a great place to start because we are going to go back to those ideas about action and taper and power, because today we're talking about the blank of your rod and like from how rods are made, what carbon graphite is, what fiberglass is, and the big question when we talk about materials is sensitivity. What is the most sensitive material? And today I want to help demystify carbon graphite rods and fiberglass rods or composite rods, like a blend of the two, to kind of give you a better idea of what's the best kind of rod material for you and your applications. There's a lot of things that I didn't learn, and talking with Witch Doctor kind of broke a lot of these like pre-made assumptions I had about fishing rod materials. So I'm really excited to share this with you. So the natural place to start here is to just talk about carbon or graphite, carbon graphite. Those words can be used interchangeably, and fiberglass, how they're made, what they're made out of. So let's start with carbon graphite, graphite. All of those words can be used interchangeably when we talk about a carbon graphite rod. And carbon graphite starts as polyacrylonitrile. Polyacrylonitrile. Okay, polyacrylonitrile, which is kind of stretched into these thin strands, and then those strands are heat treated and then woven into like a sheet, like literally like a sheet. So if you know anything about like carbon fiber, kind of a similar idea, a little different here when we're talking about rods. And I'll get into how we turn these sheets of carbon graphite into rods themselves in just a bit. But in general, when we're talking about carbon graphite rods, the general characteristics when compared to fiberglass is that they're a lot more stiff. They have better sensitivity, which is kind of what everyone always thinks, but that's not 100% true, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. But also, they're more brittle. And when I say brittle, it's not like they're brittle like brownie brittle where they're just crumble. Kind of think of this as like pencil lead, right? Like if you've ever had a mechanical pencil or just like lead in your pencil, you can bend that slightly, but at a certain point it just snaps, right? And it's the same with carbon graphite rods. If they get a little nick on them, like if you kind of hit them against something and there's like a little crack, what tends to happen is just a matter of time before that rod finally gives. If you over bend it, it can just snap altogether, but that's what a carbon graphite rod is. And while we're talking about carbon graphite, I want to talk about some terms that you may have heard kind of thrown around with carbon graphite. And the first is ton, right? You've seen like rods being sold like, 100-ton carbon or 40-ton carbon or 24-ton carbon. And what that means is actually, it's not that that rod is going to be able to lift 100 tons or 40 tons. So it doesn't necessarily denote to strength. What tonnage actually is that, hi, hobbyist editor here. Thank you so much for watching all the way in this video. I'm back again to save you from an overcomplicated description of tonnage. In my notes was Witch Doctor Tackle. We were talking about how tonnage actually changes a lot based on manufacturer to manufacturer, just kind of like how the power rating of a rod can change based on the manufacturer. So there's not really a set definition. There's a little bit of gray area here. But the best way to kind of understand what tonnage means is to think of it as like thread count for like your pillows or your like sheets. Thread count is a number of threads woven in a set amount of area. So a higher carbon graphite tonnage will have more strands tightly woven in the same area, and then a lower carbon tonnage will have less of those carbon graphite strands woven in a specified area. So it's more of about thread count. So think of it kind of like thread count. Back to the video. Of course, as you go up in tonnage, you get a much more stiff rod and technically stronger rod, but it's also still brittle and won't have much give, which we may need for fishing. And then like was a 24, you get a little bit of that bendiness from fiberglass, but you still get the sensitivity and the strength characteristics from carbon. Now let's talk about fiberglass. Very similar to carbon graphite, we make those threads. We'll make threads of fiberglass, and actually, I didn't realize this, and this is something I learned recently. Different types of fiberglass. It's a whole different discussion, but take those fiberglass threads and then you weave them just like you would with the carbon graphite threads into these sheets. And that's kind of the old school way where we would make the super bendy fiberglass rods, like full fiberglass rods. You don't really see as much anymore because nowadays we will blend fiberglass directly into and with the carbon graphite to make these blended sheets that have characteristics of both. But If we're talking about just fiberglass in a rod, the general characteristics are that it is heavier. Fiberglass as a thread is heavier than carbon graphite, and it's also thicker. So heavier, softer, so it'll bend more. So you know with fiberglass you get the really whippy rod that bend all over the place. But also they're not as brittle as a carbon graphite rod is. If they take a nick, it's not going to snap on you. It can take a little bit more of those like small nicks. That's kind of in part due because of how bendy that rod is. So now that we talked about carbon graphite and fiberglass and that those can be turned into threads that are turned into sheets and blended, now let's talk about how we actually make the fishing rods themselves. So once we get the sheets, right, we make the sheet of blended fiberglass and carbon graphite, then that sheet is actually impregnated with a resin epoxy. There's different kinds of resin that can also affect the final outcome of that rod and the sensitivity and also the strength and the taper, but we're going back to my models. So let's say this is a sheet of fiberglass and carbon graphite that has been impregnated with epoxy. Usually they come in like straight sheets, and then the rod manufacturer will actually just cut them to size. And then they'll take those sheets and then they'll have these things. So this is representing our mandrel. The mandrel is like a steel rod that has a taper just like the fishing rod. And then what we're gonna do here is we're gonna take our steel mandrel, take our sheets of impregnated carbon graphite and fiberglass, and then wrap them around this mandrel, right? So we're gonna wrap it around, and then what we can do in this stage is actually, here's where it gets fun with rod making, is that we can do multiple layers, right? Because we're stacking these layers of carbon and fiberglass, and even in different varying amounts, we can kind of wrap it around like this, right? So we take multiple sheets of our carbon and our fiberglass and then kind of wrap it around this mandrel. Once it's wrapped around, it is then heated, it's baked, right? So the steel rod inside and the heat outside will bake the materials. That epoxy will kind of fuse these layers together. And then once it's cooled, it's cured, and that's how we get our rod. And this is why it's so great to work with Witch Doctor Tackle, because they were so great about sending me cut up rod tubes. So I can kind of show you, right? So if we take like this, so you can see how thick the inside of that one is versus this one versus the size of this one. So you can see they can vary them a lot. And something really cool that Witch Doctor Tackle shared with me about how they make their rods and kind of helped me understand, the complexity of what we can literally bake into these rods in the process of making the rod blanks themselves is actually this rod. So this is a blank for a Sermon 50G. The Sermon 50G is made by Witch Doctor Tackle, of course, but it was made for a pro, Mike Sermon, who wanted a high-performing moving bait rod. And when we're talking about moving baits, we generally want a moderate, fast taper, right? We want something that loads pretty deep, but he also wanted that strength, that strength to fight fish, right? So what Witch Doctor did was this rod in particular is actually, instead of just doing one type of sheet of carbon and fiberglass that's blended to make that moderate fast action, to like put a little bit more fiberglass into the carbon sheet to get a bit more of a bend out of the final rod, what they actually did was, starting from the butt of the rod here, going through the tip, it actually transitioned. So if you ever hear the word transitional taper, sometimes it can mean this. So starting here, it has the least amount of, not the least amount, but a smaller amount of fiberglass. So it's gonna be much stiffer here in the butt. Then as we go towards the tip of the rod, it's gonna have the most bend in the tip of the rod, which is what you really want when you're fishing moving baits, because you wanna have a little bit of give on your rod for these moving baits so fish can really have a chance to bite down. But then once that fish has bit on it, you don't want a rod that's just gonna bend all the way through the back section. So down here, it's a lot stronger, so you can fight that fish and horse it out of the cover if you have to. And the reason why I wanted to share that with you is to kind of tie this back to that first episode in the series, when we're talking about power, action, and taper. And I mentioned that fishing rod technology has progressed so much, right? This is exactly what it was about. So hopefully you understand that when we're talking about materials in our rods, it's not that carbon fiber is better than fiberglass because carbon fiber is more sensitive and lighter and fiberglass is old and heavy. It's not like that at all. It's understanding the specific characteristics of carbon graphite and fiberglass, and how we can take those two attributes and blend them into a singular rod for the intended purpose. So what kind of fishing you're doing or the style of fishing you like, to meet that purpose. And more importantly, bringing this back to the mission of this Fishing Rod Masterclass in the first place, of finding the best fishing rod for you. Now I hope that you have the kind of understanding and information to go to fishing rod manufacturers and understand what they're doing with their rods and seeing for yourself, is this what I need? Is this what's gonna match my style of fishing? Instead of just listening to the marketing jargon and buying a 100-ton graphite rod because 100 is bigger than 42. Now I know I've kind of danced around this subject in this video, but that's because it's so complex. It's so based on from person to person. There's a lot of feelings that go into this topic, but that's sensitivity. You know, as bass fishermen, sensitivity is very important to us. We love talking about sensitivity, right? We love saying, oh, we have the most sensitive rod. Oh, this rod is so sensitive. And to kind of lay the groundwork for this conversation, I kind of want to start with, when do you need sensitivity? And understanding, you know, when it comes to fishing, we don't always need the most sensitive rod. So all that is to say, when it comes to the topic of sensitivity, it's very similar to the topic of finding the best fishing rod for you, is actually understanding what is the best rod that serves the purpose of the technique of fishing that you're doing. Don't sacrifice the right action and taper for the fishing technique just because you think you need to have the most sensitive rod on the market. I actually think that if you took the most sensitive rod in the world, right, and that's super stiff, designed for like bottom contact, but you take that rod and try to fish a chatterbait or a spinnerbait on it, you'll catch less fish. Either the action won't be right, or you're gonna pull that hook out of the fish's mouth too quickly, rather than matching the rod to the technique, instead of just looking for sensitivity. Now let's talk about those situations where we do need that sensitivity, and how do we get sensitivity? And even before we talk about the fishing rods, I actually want to talk about something that we don't talk about a lot, is actually fishing line affects your sensitivity a lot. So for instance, with braid has zero stretch, and on tight line, so when you have tension to your bait through your rod and to your reel, that's gonna add a lot of sensitivity. It doesn't matter how unsensitive your rod is. If you're fishing braid that's tight, you will feel that vibration go right through the line all the way through to your hand. But the reason why I say tight line is that braid, because it's thread, if you're fishing a slack line technique where there's slack in the line, a small bite, there are vibrations going through the braid, it just dampens out a lot quicker because it's just a flimsy thread. Kind of think of it like, you know, if you've ever made those like cup phones where you put the line through the cup, when that line is slack, you're not going to hear anything, but when it's tight, you'll hear something, which is the same idea here. So braid can help with your sensitivity a lot. And then like fluorocarbon, when a fish bites it, because of the characteristics of that line, that vibration will travel through your line, even on slack line, a lot better than braid. And then that's when we get to the rod. So when it's touching the rod tips, how you feel that vibration come through. And it's all about vibration, right? So when we talk about like high modulus graphite will have the most sensitivity because high modulus graphite can be rolled much thinner than other graphites, or even like fiberglass blends, but because it has less material for that vibration to travel through, that vibration will be translated to you a lot more efficiently. But that doesn't mean you need a high modulus carbon or like a super high carbon content rod to get the best sensitivity. Something that I learned from Adam is actually that you can take a fiberglass rod, and then if you put something that will translate vibration, like a wire wrapped around that rod from the tip all the way to your hand, that will help translate that vibration into your rod. It'll make the rod a lot heavier. So again, we're balancing now sensitivity to actual real life use cases of swinging a heavy rod all day versus a light rod. Understand that carbon isn't the only answer when it comes to sensitivity. And also when we're talking about sensitivity, a really easy check that you can do when you're buying a rod or looking at a rod is actually looking at the reel seat, because the reel seat itself is actually a separately manufactured piece that is put onto the rod itself. How the reel seat is put onto the rod blank can actually take a super sensitive rod blank, but dampen that vibration and dampen the sensitivity of that rod. So it's important to kind of look at it. And a good way to look at it is like, so this is not a Witch Doctor rod, but this is a rod I fish a lot. So if you can see, this is like the rod color and the wrapping and the pattern on it. When you look at the reel seat, see how it's exposed right there? You can see the exposed part of the rod there. You want to make sure that this color that's on your rod blank matches the color down here. What that usually means is that when you're holding this rod like this, you're getting a direct connection to the rod blank. So any vibration that's coming through your rod, you're going to feel it directly into your finger. So that's a really easy and good way to kind of check for if this rod's going to be decently sensitive. Something that Witch Doctor does and not a lot of companies do, but some do. So as you see, this is their reel seat that they cut up for me. You see this silver part, this is a texalium. Some companies, when they put their reel seats on the rod, they'll use a lot of glue and tape to kind of fit this reel seat onto the blank, right? But what Witch Doctor does with this texalium sucks up that epoxy or that glue really well. So they will put the glue on the rod, then put the texalium, it'll soak up that glue, and then when they put that reel seat over it, it fuses the reel seat to the rod blank. So as you can see, this is the cut part of it. See how it's like one singular piece? It's solid all the way through, which allows you, of course, and of course you have all these exposed parts, so when you're holding your reel, you can feel the vibrations of your rod. That's another way that a rod company can preserve the sensitivity of the blank going into your hand. So that's just a nice, easy way to check and something to look out for that's really easy to tell just visually when you're looking at a rod. Thank you for watching the second part of the Fishing Rod Masterclass. If you have any questions, just like the last episode, please leave them in the comments. Myself and Witch Doctor Tackle will be in the comments trying to help answer any questions. I'm so excited that you guys are loving this series. I'm so excited to share it with you. I'm having a lot of fun making these videos and kind of nerding out about fishing rods. But today, hopefully you have a better understanding about the materials that go into our fishing rods and understanding that it's not just about one is superior than the other. It's understanding the blend of the two to match the technique of fishing that you're doing, and also a little bit more about what sensitivity really means when it comes to fishing. So again, thank you so much for watching. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. If you like this video, like it, share it with your friends. It helps a lot. And also in the link below, if you want to check out some of Witch Doctor's stuff, I have the Witch Doctor website down there, but also Kyle. Thank you so much for watching. Can't wait to show the next one to you guys. So what are you waiting for? Get out there.